There was a sound American drivers could pick out from a quarter of a mile off, a high mechanical scream rising over the traffic, climbing as the throttle opened. Unmistakable the way a voice is unmistakable. For the better part of 50 years, it was simply the noise the interstate made. It hauled the freight. It pushed the buses. It idled in the truck stops at 3 in the morning. The drivers who worked around it could tell you what was wrong with one just by listening to it run. More than 5 million of these engines were built. At its peak, it powered better than one heavy truck in 3 on the roads of the United States. And before any of that, it had carried infantry onto the beaches and driven tanks across France. And then, inside roughly a decade, it was gone. Pulled off the highway, shut down, left to fade into the background until children grew up who had never once heard it. The company that built those 5 million engines is the same company that turned its back on them. Not because the market beat it, not because anyone out-engineered it, because of one decision taken in one room by men who had already been handed a document telling them in plain language what that decision would cost. They made it anyway. This is the story of the engine the soldiers named the Screaming Jimmy, and of Detroit Diesel, the company that gave it to the world and then chose, over the protests of its own workshop, to stop building it. And it starts, oddly enough, with one man refusing to let that engine die before it had ever drawn breath. In 1930, the working machinery of America runs on gasoline, the trucks, the buses, the cranes, and the dozers and the generators on every construction site in the country. Diesel exists, but in 1930 it is a European object, built around the 4-stroke cycle Rudolf Diesel had patented back in the 1890s. And in that form it is heavy, intricate, and temperamental. It wants a precision injection pump, a complicated valve arrangement, and a fitter who can strip a fuel system without letting a speck of grit near it. None of that belongs in a haulage yard in Cleveland or a railway shed in Kansas City, where the men have oily hands and a tin of tools and a job to finish before dark. So America stays with gasoline, and most of the men running its industry assume it always will. One man at General Motors is convinced the whole approach is wrong from the foundations up. His name is Charles Kettering, and he runs the General Motors Research Division. He is a self-taught engineer out of rural Ohio, the man behind the electric self-starter, the device that finally let a driver start a car without standing in front of it and swinging a crank handle, the handle that broke more wrists and jaws in the early years of motoring than the automobiles themselves managed to do. By 1930 he is 63, and inside General Motors he carries the particular authority that comes from being proved right, again and again, about machines nobody else would back. Delco ignition, the chemistry that took the knock out of fuel, the diesel locomotive engine that would sweep steam off the railroads. The board listens to him. He has spent a career arguing for engineering judgment over the spreadsheets and winning. What he does not have is an open line of credit. Every time Kettering wins an argument with the engineering committee, the committee files the memory away, and the committee is the body that approves the budgets. What he wants to build is not a better 4-stroke, it is a different machine entirely. A 2-stroke diesel, firing on every single turn of the crankshaft rather than every other turn. More power for a given size, a simpler set of valves, and crucially, a design that could be scaled up and down a whole family of engines, from 2 cylinders to 16, all sharing the same pistons, liners, and injectors, so that a man who could mend one could mend any of them. An engine you could pull apart in a field with hand tools. It is an elegant idea. It is also an idea that has buried everyone who has tried it. Every 2-stroke diesel built before this one had smoked, choked on its own filth, and torn itself apart inside 1,000 running hours. The engineering committee has sat through Kettering on this subject before, and they are not warming to it. The first prototype fails. The fault is in something called scavenging. In a 2-stroke, there is no leisurely separate stroke to push the burnt gas out and pull the fresh air in. Both have to happen in the same sliver of a second, as the piston passes the bottom of its travel. Get the shape of it even slightly wrong, and the two flows tangle. Spent exhaust stays trapped, watered down by the incoming cold air, and what should be a clean charge of oxygen becomes a confused mess of half-burnt gas. The burn turns ragged. Black smoke rolls out of the stack. The power falls away the moment a load is put on it. Kettering's team reworks the porting and tries again. They try a second arrangement. Both fail the same way. What the committee reads in those test reports is a research program burning real money to confirm exactly what they had always suspected: that the two-stroke diesel was a dead end, and a clever man had talked himself into a corner. The team is small, fewer than a dozen engineers on it, full-time, but every hour those engines spend on the stand is charged against the research budget at the very bottom of the depression, while every other corner of General Motors is letting men go. The committee reviews the program and recommends it be shut down. Kettering reads the recommendation, declines it, and asks for one more attempt. The answer comes together across the second half of the 1930s. It is called uniflow scavenging, and the principle is in the name. The fresh air no longer fights the exhaust. It comes in through a ring of ports cut around the bottom of the cylinder liner, travels straight up the bore, pushing the burnt gas ahead of it and out through valves in the top of the head. Everything moves in one direction. Nothing doubles back, nothing mixes. And to make certain there is always enough clean air down there, a Roots-type supercharger is geared directly off the crankshaft, driven by the engine itself, ramming air into the cylinders under pressure. For the first time, the engine breathes properly. The first running version produces clean exhaust under full load, a steady idle, and a power curve the heavy European four-stroke simply cannot reach for the size of it. Kettering has his engine. The same committee that had wanted the program killed only a few years earlier signs off the money to put it into production. In 1938, General Motors stands up a dedicated diesel division to build it. The first engine out of that division is the Series 71. The number is the displacement, 71 cubic inches in each cylinder, and it arrives at once in 2, 3, 4, and 6 cylinder forms. Everyone shares a bore, a stroke, a head casting, a liner, a piston. Service one and you have learned to service all of them. Stock the shelf for one and you have stocked it for the whole family. It is about as close as American heavy industry has come to a diesel built out of interchangeable parts, and that single quality is the thing that will carry it through the next half-century. Through the late 1930s, the engine takes root. Buses, trucks, boats. The operators who buy it write back to Detroit with figures the gasoline competition cannot answer. A Series 71 in a city bus will run 800 hours between services, where a gasoline engine might need attention after 200. Long-haul men in Texas and California write in to ask how soon they can get the next batch of inline sixes. The engine is doing precisely what Kettering said it would. What it has not yet faced is a demand no peacetime order book could ever have generated. In December of 1941, everything about the calculation changes in a single morning. The engine is not going to prove itself on a test stand in Detroit, after all. It is going to prove itself on a beach, under fire, built at a rate the factory has never once attempted. By the spring of 1942, the War Production Board, run by William Knudsen, himself a former president of General Motors and a man who knew to the bolt what the corporation could do when pushed, has gone through every diesel engine made in America. The list of engines that can be built in vast numbers, serviced in the field by ordinary mechanics, and dropped into boats and tanks and trucks all at once is very short. In practice, it is one engine, the Series 71. Detroit Diesel gets the contract. 3 shifts. The line does not stop, day or night. Production climbs through 1942 and tops out near 6,000 engines a month. Step onto the plant floor on Outer Drive in Detroit on the second shift, sometime in the spring of 1943, and it does not feel like an engine factory, It feels like a foundry ordered to run faster than its own designers ever intended. The smell reaches you before anything else. Hot iron drifting off the casting floor. The sharp chemical bite of cutting oil from the boring lines. And under it all, the sweetish, scorched tang of two-stroke exhaust, because the test cells are running finished engines around the clock. Cylinder blocks ride the conveyors past inspection benches, where women in coveralls, because by 1943 most of the inspectors are women and most of the men are overseas, read their gauges to the nearest thousandth of an inch. The noise is the hammer of the presses and the howl of the mills, and rising over all of it every few minutes, the climbing scream of a six-cylinder 71 run up to full song before it is crated and shipped. Every engine leaving that building is going somewhere a man's life will depend on it working. The marinized version, the Grey Marine 671, powers the Higgins boat, the flat plywood landing craft that puts infantry onto the sand from Normandy to the atolls of the Pacific. The Sherman tank, in its diesel form, runs a power unit built from two of the inline sixes bolted together side by side, sharing a single output shaft, the modular design taken to its end because the Army trusted the engine enough to double it rather than commission something new. The same engine in other forms drives auxiliary ships, hauls supply convoys, runs the generators in field hospitals and the cranes on the docks. There is one of them turning over somewhere in every theater of the war, and it is in those years that the sound is born. The whine of that crankshaft-driven blower climbing toward its working pitch, a rising mechanical cry that carries across open water and through coastal fog. The men who serve around it give it a name. They call it the Screaming Jimmy. Some say the Jimmy comes from GMC, General Motors clipped to a nickname. Some say it comes straight from the noise. Both stories are true, and the name follows the engine for the next 50 years. And while all of this is happening, two other companies are watching. Out in Columbus, Indiana, Cummins is selling 4-stroke diesels of its own to the Army and to the very same fleets that buy from Detroit. Down in Peoria, Illinois, Caterpillar is doing the same. They are competing on the same roads in the same year. Detroit Diesel has the momentum, the name, and the wartime contracts. The other two have something that will, in the end, matter more than any of those things. They have the 4-stroke. The war ends in 1945, and the surplus engines pour out into civilian hands. Greyhound builds its whole post-war coach network on Detroit diesel power. The inline 6 leads the way, and then from 1957, the V-block family opens the architecture right out. A 6, an 8, a 12, a 16-cylinder V, all still drinking from the same parts catalog Kettering's logic had laid down 20 years before. Mack specifies the 12-cylinder version for its heaviest haulage. The engine goes into tugboats on the Mississippi, the fishing fleets out of New Bedford, the rigs in the Gulf, the generators down the mines. The Screaming Jimmy becomes the working soundtrack of post-war America. And it becomes more than a product. It becomes a character on the roads. It is not the smoothest engine in the country, and nowhere near the quietest. The blower drone at idle is loud enough to rattle a coffee cup on a diner counter 40 feet away. But in exchange for the racket, it offers the closest thing American freight has ever had to a guaranteed day's work. It will fire up in a Wyoming winter at 30 below. It will run on diesel cut with whatever happens to pour. It will take its servicing from a man with a tool roll standing in a yard in the rain. And the drivers learn to speak its language. They know a bearing is going by the sound of it. They know which injector is fouling by the way the exhaust note shifts on a change of gear. The engine talks to them, and they listen. When I went back through the production numbers from those years, I had to read one figure twice. By the middle of the 1950s, if you stood at the side of a busy interstate, comfortably more than one in every 3 heavy trucks rolling past was running a Detroit diesel. Inside the company, that did not feel like a market position. It felt like a fact of nature. It was not. In 1965, the operation is renamed the Detroit Diesel Engine Division. In 1970, it is merged with Allison, the transmission builder, into Detroit Diesel Allison. This is the high water mark of the division's weight inside General Motors. Cummins is in the field with its own heavy range. Caterpillar is competitive across the board. But Detroit Diesel leads on the name and on the sheer number of its engines already out there working. And from inside the building, the lead feels permanent. It feels like part of the structure of the country. If you are finding this story as strange and as quietly tragic as I do, take a second to subscribe. We are building the largest archive of industrial documentaries anywhere on YouTube, and the engineers and the line workers in this story deserve to have it told properly. On the 6th of October 1973, Egyptian and Syrian forces cross into territory held by Israel. Within days, the oil-producing states of OPEC place an embargo on the United States, and the four-stroke engines that Cummins and Caterpillar have been quietly selling alongside the Jimmy for 2 decades are about to become the only sensible answer to the one question every fleet operator in America is suddenly asking. The price at the pump climbs from somewhere around 38 cents a gallon toward a peak above 80. Fuel had always been a secondary line on the order form. The thing you settled after power, after torque, after reliability, after parts. Overnight, it moves to the top of the page. For a national operator running 1,500 trucks, each covering 500,000 miles a year, a single mile per gallon at the new price of diesel is the line between a profitable year and a losing one. A fleet manager who picked the Screaming Jimmy in 1972 because nothing could match it for pulling power is now sitting across a desk from a finance man who wants to know why their fuel bill is running 20% ahead of the outfit across town that bought Cummins. And here the two-stroke's great strength quietly becomes its great weakness. Because it fires on every revolution, it cannot draw its own air the way a four-stroke can. It depends on that crankshaft-driven blower forcing the air through under pressure, and that blower is not free. It is a parasite bolted to the front of the engine, taking a slice of the power off the crankshaft before any of it reaches the wheels. At full throttle, hauling hard, you barely notice. But out on the highway at a steady cruise, at the partial loads where a truck spends most of its life, the two-stroke simply cannot match a four-stroke for the work it gets out of a gallon. At the precise moment the market changes for good, Detroit Diesel is selling the most powerful heavy diesel in the country. And power has just stopped being the thing anyone is buying. This is where the trap closes, and it is worth being fair about how it closed, because the men who walked into it were not fools. There is a new engine already deep in development, and has been for years before the embargo. It is called the Series 92, a bigger two-stroke V-block. More displacement, more power, the same architecture pushed further down its own road. The money to develop it is substantial, and most of it has already been spent. So picture the room in early 1974. To walk away from the Series 92 now is to write off a major capital commitment. On the strength of a crisis nearly everyone in authority still expects to blow over. The institution has its own reasoning, and it is not stupid reasoning. Fuel prices might settle back down. Customers have always come back for power in the end. The two-stroke is the engine this company knows how to build, at scale, better than anyone alive. On paper, in the early months of 1974, the decision to stay the course is defensible. But inside Detroit Diesel's own engineering division, another set of papers exists, and they say something very different. The gap in fuel economy against the four-stroke competition is not a hunch. It is measured and written down, and the emissions rules now coming over the horizon have been modeled, and the modeling leaves no room for comfort. Because of the way it is built, the two-stroke carries a flaw it cannot engineer away. Those intake ports cut into the cylinder walls mean the oil rings are forever sliding back and forth across open holes, and small amounts of lubricating oil are continuously dragged into the combustion chamber and out into the exhaust. Trying to control that oil, while at the same time bringing combustion temperatures down to cut the oxides of nitrogen, all without producing a stack full of smoke, is, in a two-stroke, very close to impossible. A four-stroke, with its sealed crankcase and separate breathing strokes, meets those same rules more cleanly and far more cheaply, and the engineers on the floor know it down to the decimal. The position they put forward is blunt. A four-stroke development program has to begin now, running in parallel with the Series 92, or Detroit Diesel will spend the next 10 years fighting the next market with the last market's engine. In 1974, the Series 92 launches as planned. The four-stroke program is not funded. The distance between what the workshop had documented and what the boardroom decided is now fixed, and it measures 13 years across. The four-stroke replacement, the engine that should have started life in 1975, will not reach the market until 1987. The emissions rules arrive not as one blow, but in waves through the back half of the 1970s, and each tightening lands on exactly the part of the engine least able to take it. Uniflow scavenging, the very breakthrough that had made the Series 71 possible, is now the source of the engine's compliance problem. The four-stroke rivals clear each new hurdle for less money. Detroit Diesel is fighting on two fronts at once, fuel economy on one flank and emissions on the other, and on both the contest is scored against the architecture's weaknesses rather than its strengths. Every cycle of new regulation costs money the division does not really have, spent on tooling changes and reworked injectors. All of it a patch laid over an engine the workshop had already declared, back in 1973, would not pass the very rules now being written. None of it buys a clean margin. It buys just enough to ship one more model year, with the next round of standards already on the calendar. The competition does not wait to be asked in. In 1976, Cummins launches its big cam engine, and the marketing is aimed with surgical care straight at Detroit Diesel's own fleet customers. The numbers in the advertisements are not horsepower figures. They are cost-per-mile figures, fuel economy figures, the exact language a fleet manager speaks all day. The embargo did not create this opening for Cummins. The embargo made it decisive. One fleet at a time, the contracts begin their migration from Detroit to Columbus, and Caterpillar runs the same play out of Peoria. And the erosion is the cruelest kind, because there is no single dramatic loss anyone can point to. A national carrier buys 50 Cummins tractors in 1976 to run alongside its Jimmies and compare them. A year later, the fuel logs come back showing a clear improvement. At the next replacement cycle, the carrier orders 300 Cummins. At the cycle after that, 900. Multiply that one quiet pattern across every major carrier in the country, and you arrive at the share figures that land on a Detroit Diesel sales director's desk in 1981, by which point the slide is no longer deniable. And the parent corporation cannot dig the division out, because by now General Motors has troubles of its own that dwarf Detroit Diesel entirely. Through the 1980s, the corporation pours something on the order of $50 billion into modernizing its plants and products. Of that vast sum, by the figures that later surface in the industry analysis, something in the region of $100 million reaches Detroit Diesel. And here is where the true bill for that 1974 decision finally comes due. By choosing to double down on the two-stroke instead of turning early, Detroit Diesel had squandered the one window when the money was there for the taking. When General Motors' own crisis hit, the heavy engine division was trapped as a captive internal supplier, scrapping for crumbs while the real capital flowed toward the passenger car divisions, fighting off the Japanese. The investment a proper four-stroke program needed was now an argument a captive division simply could not win inside that building. What this looks like from the inside, across the late 1970s and into the 1980s, is a slow grinding down. Decisions that take longer, teams that get smaller, tooling spend deferred a year, and then another, until the deferrals have compounded into an entire generation of lost ground. Engineers who had joined the division in 1969 because it was the finest diesel program in America watch their best work sit in a queue for funding that never quite comes. Some leave, some stay, convinced the corporation will eventually wake up to what it is throwing away. The ones who stay are still at their benches in 1987 when the new engine finally launches. They are the reason it is as good as it is. The corporation that had owned them for 13 years is not. And here is the part of all this I keep circling back to. The men who built the Series 71 in the 1930s, the ones who cracked the scavenging problem against the recommendation of their own committee, were exactly the kind of engineers who could have built the four-stroke replacement in 1975. The talent had not gone anywhere. The skill was still there on the floor. What was missing was not the ability to start. It was permission to start. The same company that had given Charles Kettering one more attempt in 1937 had, by 1974, lost the capacity to hear its own engineers at all. By 1987, the market share has bottomed out near 3 or 4% of the American heavy truck engine business. The Screaming Jimmy still runs in trucks all across the continent, but those trucks get a year older with every year, and no new ones are joining them. Inside the General Motors structure, the question being asked about Detroit Diesel has quietly changed. It is no longer how to fix the division. It is what the division might be worth to somebody else. And one man, well outside the corporation, has already sat down and done that arithmetic for himself. In 1987, Detroit Diesel at last launches its four-stroke. It is called the Series 60. 12.7 liters, electronic engine management. It is the first heavy-duty diesel sold in America with fully integrated electronic control, able to map its own fueling in real time across the operating range. But the Series 60 was never designed to be a statement about power. It was designed to be a statement about efficiency, which is precisely what the American trucking market had been begging for since October of 1973. It is a superb engine, and it arrives 13 years late. The man who has done the arithmetic is Roger Penske. To most of the public, Penske is a name from motor racing, the Indianapolis 500, the championship teams, the owner you saw on the television on the holiday weekend. But the real expertise behind the name is operational. Penske runs a truck leasing business with tens of thousands of vehicles on the road across North America, and he understands a diesel engine the way a fleet manager understands one, as a single cost-per-mile number stretched across the whole life of a contract. When he looks at Detroit Diesel in 1987, he does not see a failing division. He sees a company that has just put a genuinely competitive engine on the market, that still holds a deep bench of engineering talent, and that sits on a market share so far down it has nowhere to go but up, provided one thing changes. Provided it is run as a standalone business that lives or dies on its own sales, rather than the captive supplier of a corporation that has stopped paying it any real attention. The due diligence is line by line. The Series 60's bill of materials, its warranty record, the depreciation on its tooling, the margin on each engine at 3 different volumes of production. They model what the engine could do if it were sold by a company whose entire reason for existing was selling it. The number they come back with is a business that is structurally sound at 1.5 times the 1987 share and structurally dominant at 4 times it. The Series 60 is the asset. Everything else is execution. In a deal reported at somewhere around $300 million, Penske takes 60% of Detroit Diesel in 1988. General Motors keeps the other 40%, and the conditions that had made the long decline possible, the captive supplier status, the endless internal fight for capital, the passenger car divisions taking every priority call, all simply evaporate the moment the ownership changes hands. Detroit Diesel is now answerable to one thing only, which is its own performance in the market. There is one engine, the Series 60, and one job, which is to sell it. Within a few short years, as the tougher federal emissions deadlines of the early 1990s come into force, on-highway production of the two-stroke is shut down for good. And the Screaming Jimmy, as the ordinary background noise of American commercial roads, falls silent. If you ever drove behind one of these engines, or worked on one, or had a father who did, leave a comment and tell me. I want to know which engine, which truck, which job it was. The two-stroke does not vanish completely. It carries on for marine and military and stationary work, rolling off specialized lines well into the following decade for the customers who never got the upgrade money. The combat vehicles, the fishing boats, the generator sets, the mining gear. But on the interstates, in the truck stops, in all the places where you used to hear it coming from a quarter of a mile away, the engine that had defined 40 years of American freight is finished. The Penske turnaround, when it comes, is fast and structural. The market share climbs from that 3 to 4% floor in 1988 to around a third of the market by 1993. And the mechanism is nothing more exotic than focus. Every engineering resource goes onto the Series 60. The Penske leasing fleet itself becomes a direct channel into the market. The plant is reorganized around a single family of engines. Suppliers carried for years on the strength of the old General Motors relationship are renegotiated against hard benchmark pricing. The Series 60 finds its market for one reason above all others. For the first time in 15 years, it is being sold by a company whose whole existence depends on selling it. Detroit Diesel is a viable business again. What it is no longer is everything Charles Kettering designed it to be. In 1993, Mercedes-Benz takes an 11% stake. In 2000, Daimler Chrysler buys the company outright, and Detroit Diesel folds into Daimler Trucks North America. The Detroit brand survives the transition. Its engines, the DD13 and the DD15, are pulling American freight today. The company endured. The architecture did not. The Series 60 itself, the engine that saved the business, is discontinued in 2011 and replaced by the DD15. And the two-stroke Screaming Jimmies live on in the places nobody is keeping score, in restored trucks at the vintage rallies, in the engine rooms of working fishing boats that never quite earned the cost of a refit, in tugboats on rivers where nobody is watching the emissions calendar. The architecture did not so much collapse as retreat, slowly, into the corners of the working world, and in a strange way that makes it harder to say exactly where it ended, and harder to mourn. Step back and look at the size of what was built, and the numbers stop you. Across the whole life of the architecture, Detroit Diesel made more than 5 million two-stroke engines. 5 million. And every one of them traces back to that one prototype Charles Kettering refused to let his own committee bury in 1937. That is what was truly on the table in 1974, when the institution chose the Series 92 over a four-stroke future. They were not just defending an engine, they were defending the inheritance of 50 years of work, 50 years of refusing to give up on an idea everyone said could not be made to work. And the bitter joke of it is that the only way to actually preserve that inheritance, to keep the company alive and the engineers employed and the name on the trucks, was in the end to walk away from the engine itself. The institution could not see that. The men on the floor could. They had been saying it, in writing, since 1973. Go and stand at the old General Motors diesel site at Redford, in Michigan. Some of it is parking lot now, some of it is repurposed into other industry, and the freight you can hear moving somewhere in the distance is running on engines built 3,000 miles from where the Screaming Jimmy was born. Close your eyes. Listen for the blower climbing toward its working pitch on a third-shift test stand. Catch the smell of two-stroke exhaust and gear oil and hot iron lifting off a block fresh out of assembly. See the 3 shifts moving across the floor and the line that never once stopped. 6,000 finished engines a month coming off the test stands at the height of the war. Picture a foreman walking the night shift with a clipboard under his arm, a man who could tell you which line a misfiring 671 had come off, just from the way it idled. Now open your eyes. The line is not there. The test cells are not there. The men who knew the engine by its voice are not there. The company did not die. The Daimler engines still pull American trucks down the same roads. What died was the decision, taken inside the institution that owned it, to keep fighting for the engine its own workshop had built. We did not lose this engine because the market stopped wanting what it could do. We lost it because the company that built it stopped being the kind of company that would fight for it. The same company that once gave one stubborn man one more attempt and changed the working life of a continent because of it, sat in a room 40 years later, was handed the answer in plain writing, and could no longer hear a word of it. If you ever drove behind a screaming Jimmy, worked on one, or grew up listening to your father talk about the engine that built his working life, hit subscribe. We are building the largest archive of industrial documentaries on YouTube, and a workforce that turned out 5 million of these engines deserves to be remembered properly. A like on this video helps the channel reach the next person who needs to see it. I'll see you on the next one.